My name is Patricia Ellingwood. Thanks for joining us for the first of two extended grazing webinars. Tonight we'll be talking about bale grazing with Ontario mentors Dean Cober and Chris Moore, and facilitated by OMAFA Forage and Grazing Specialist Christine O'Reilly. Thanks for coming, guys, and I'm going to turn things over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Um, Good evening, everybody. This kind of feels like an unusual time to think about bale grazing because it's often a practice that we talk about in the fall, but we wanted to discuss it before we really get into spring planting and the rest of the growing season because we know that this is the time of year where people are planning, where we're thinking about the big picture of the year as a whole. So that's why we wanted to talk about this now before everyone's back out in the field for another growing season. So to get us started, as Patricia said, Dean Cober and Chris Moore are joining me. They're going to start by sharing some of their experiences with bale grazing. I encourage you to stick questions in the chat as we go. Once we've heard about their operations, then I'll start taking questions from the audience to put to our grazing mentors. And yeah, we're hoping to have some great discussion around bale grazing.
Hi, I'm Chris. We're sheep farmers here in the Ottawa Valley. We're just west of Ottawa, Kimbern, Ontario. Um, we tried bale grazing a few years ago, and that was our plan for the whole winter's worth of feed. But I think it was wrong and stupid, but I also still do it. But I just don't do it how maybe you'd hear about it being done out west on the prairies where they get less snow and less freeze thaw cycles. So this picture here is pretty recent. Those sheep are all pretty well all sheared here this morning and today. Um, but you can see the bales going out along the fence line where I'm not scratching my tractor, and I can help push any of those trees that are trying to grow out in the field back. So we tried it in 2017. We brought home a load of ewe lambs. We did not have them trained to our electric fence. They weren't trained to net, which we normally use, and they weren't trained to two strand, which I tried doing with this, and it didn't work good at all. They were growing ewe lambs that I was trying to get bred because we needed the lambs from those ewe lambs to, cash flow our business, and you know, their performance was definitely impacted trying to get through frozen bales and then have the issue of them not properly fence trained. Sheep are pretty small compared to cattle, so if you have densely packed bales from like a more modern round baler, um, you go through a few freeze thaw cycles and it can be really challenging for something small like a sheep that you need to perform to get through those. But I think if you had a bigger, stronger beef cow that was on a more of a maintenance diet, it would probably make a lot more sense than having sheep that you're trying to grow and get bred. I already had a tractor at the time, so that I was starting to feed a different group of sheep, so I wasn't saving a whole lot of fuel and energy and stuff like that. So it wasn't really good value there and then. And then we ended up with a bit of a weed issue because the sheep weren't big enough and strong enough to clean those bales up like I needed to. So this is how we are normally feeding our sheep right now. We're on rolling bales. We have the tractor already. I don't like any of the round bale feed racks that are available commercially. I find like they're pretty good at killing sheep, so I don't like using them. And I know wool's not worth much, but there's no point in ruining it further with a round bale feed rack for sheep that makes it worse. I also don't like driving tractors very much, so the thought of like feeding sheep in a yard that I have to scrape and clean out and spread manure really doesn't appeal to me very much. I like putting the fertility where I need it and having my sheep doing as much work for that as they can. So unrolling bales puts that fertility in the field, and Christine can talk more probably about doing frost seeding and establishing and thickening up stands. This has been a really good way of us being able to do that. And but we still do some bale grazing this time of year actually to manage ruts. So tractors are pretty heavy when the ground's soft. We're a clay loam here, so like we have loam hills. So you think they should be dry, but if you drive out there, you can go to the axles real fast. So I like picking, when we have a good frost in the morning, I will go out and I will take wagon loads of hay out and I will what we call bale bomb um, areas, and I'm just dumping bales with no net, and the sheep can keep eating those and be spread out enough so that there's not a lot of competition on those really cold mornings where the ground is firm enough to carry a tractor and a hay wagon, so I'm not making ruts. And then for the days I can't do that, I have a bale and roller for behind the quad. But normally we're bale and rolling with a tractor in the cold months. So yeah, we still do some bale grazing. You can see there I have a bit of a trail cut into the woods, and I'm just dropping bales, so that is adding fertility to the soil, and it's getting me those, like any seed bank that's in those bales is going into an area um, where it's going to have a chance to establish. I'm doing it in areas where it's really good shelter, and sheep really struggle in wet, muddy conditions. So I'm trying to make sure I'm putting them in a place that keeps them dry. And I mean, that's a bush, but we have really good guard dogs, so I'm not really worried about coyotes or any other predators. And we call that bale bombing. A friend of mine is doing bale grazing with sheep down by Lakefield, B. Chan, and I thought that was a really smart way. Like, if you're a small scale sheep farmer, I think bale grazing has a lot of value because you can, instead of buying a tractor, have a quad instead that is probably more efficient most of the year, and then add more sheep instead, and you can protect your hay using that tarp. So that'll, like, that, those sheets of plastic we probably put on our windows on a lot of our old farmhouses, and then everyone's got pallets and stuff kicking around. I thought that was such a smart way to preserve your feed quality, so you can still get that animal performance that you need, and everything's reusable. So that's, I thought, a really smart way of getting the most out of stuff. um, if I was to bale graze again for the whole winter, I would definitely want to have cows that were big and strong enough to push those bales around and get into everything. And I would not want to be doing it with younger ewes that I'm trying to grow and get them to conceive. I want to use mature ewes that have probably already been bred. Um, but I think it's a really good fit for farms that are not sure if they need a tractor or not, and just have their hay bought in and delivered, and then have the farmer that's delivering that hay drop those bales where they want. So, as much as I think bale grazing is stupid and wrong, I definitely still see a place for it, and I'm still using it for certain times of the year. Thanks. Thank you. Ask me about a rapid winder. We sell them, and it fits on your quad, and it's awesome.
So, Chris, because you launched right into your bale grazing experience, couple quick questions for you. Where do you farm, and roughly how many ewes are you running?
We farm in West Ottawa. We can make it to a Sens game in about 15 minutes. Um, so Ottawa Valley, Clay Loam, when we're running a couple hundred ewes and ewe lambs. And we keep our ewe lambs separate from our ewes. And we're trying to do more snacking with grain, because grain's become a pretty good um, value for us.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to ask Dean if he'll tell us a little bit about where he farms, his operation, and his experience with bale grazing.
All right. Hi, I'm Dean Cober. My wife and I farm near Owen Sound, Grey County. We're halfway between Owen Sound and Meaford on Highway 26. We run a maternal red Angus herd, about 50 head of cow calf. We run a breeding program as well, kind of manage them separately, and we rotationally graze. Um, Bale grazing fits well into our operation. We utilize that in the fall, kind of after grazing cover crops and kind of at the same time. Keeps our cows out of the barnyard. Right. So when we're talking about bale grazing, this is kind of what we're doing. We're setting up a pod of bales. And in our situation, we're moving the wire across that pod, and providing bales each day or every couple days worth of grazing. Um, where are we bale grazing? For us, we're targeting our more scrubby areas, places we want to beat back the brush, and improve. This farm here you see in the picture, that's 100 acres that we lease beside us. It was last hayed in 1994. It's grown up in brush. Um, that's just what happens in this area when it goes back to the wild. So like scrub brush up 8, 10 feet. In this picture you see here, this is stuff we had mulched several years previous. So we're getting good grass production. We haven't seeded anything in this area. It's just what was there from the seed bank and many years ago. So like we say, kind of our first step, we're getting in there and we're chopping this brush back. It's pretty tall. This is just a brush hog style brush mulcher. We put 100 horse on it and just work at the worst stuff on that pasture farm. We're taking bales right from our hay fields and delivering them to these paddocks. So we're using more. We have a farm that we typically only make one cut of hay on, and it's a delayed haying due to the birds. So that this hay is of good quality, but it's got more seed head in it typically than our other hay. So, like I say, we're taking it right from the field and we're taking it to a bale grazing pod. I put 4 loads on to about 10 acres, and that worked pretty well. Um, as we're laying them out in the field, I take the strings off. We use twine, we don't use net wrap. You could pull all the twines after they're set up by cutting the string, tying it together, and pulling them out with the four-wheeler. I've seen that done. But for myself, I just set them all out at night and pulled all the strings. And yeah, that was 4 loads worth. And then as we're daily moving through, we're making daily paddocks in that pod with just pigtails. You can see the kind of hoof action that we've got here in the picture. I'm okay with that amount of hoof action. We're stimulating that seed bank that's there, and we're beating up the plants that we don't want. And that stuff surprisingly recovers well. You can see a bit of bale residue in the background. Maybe they should have been moved a day sooner, but that's okay. We just kind of watch that and give the amount of bales that they're consuming in the amount of time we want to make another paddock. Typically, we're moving those paddocks on foot because usually by that time of year, it's gotten too wet for the four-wheeler even, certainly too wet for the tractor. But it works well. Carolyn goes out there with their little kids and moves them around. And we want to give enough bales that all the cattle aren't competing too much, kind of based on the herd size that we got. Here you can see we don't have a really tight pod in this situation. We could have had a tighter, but I'm kind of okay with that. Uh, they're big bossy cows. I don't know about your herd, but those bales tend to move around as they're grazing them. So if you kind of make them too tight and you got poly wire they'll just push it over the poly wire or down a hill or something silly like that. So I spread them out a little more, but we can be a little more intensive than that. And you can see like we're really doing a number on the bushy weeds. I'm good with that kind of amount of cover. Another note, we don't back fence. So all those cattle can come back and lay on those piles and they'll rough it up. And the calves, we're doing this with the calves still on the cows. It's a good time you can put out your creep feeders as well. We got good manure distribution. I'm pretty happy with that. We're getting a lot of manure on this area we're trying to improve. So that's definitely a plus. Another picture of some manure distribution, and you got some residue there in the fall. Um, but certainly it's good for fertility, and that's our biggest thing. We're getting our grass coming back and back better than if we're just regular rotational grazing management, because we're adding organic matter, of course. All right. I'm sure I missed some points, but perhaps they'll come up in the questions here.
Thanks, Dean. So, um, I guess my first question for both of you is why did you start bale grazing?
For me, it's a better fall option to keep cows out of the barnyard. Um, we usually run out of cover crops to graze by then, and we still got some season that, yeah, I don't really want them in the barnyard. I've still got the calves on the cows. I find when they come into the barnyard and we've got them still as pairs, we start having problems with calves getting run over. So by then we're weaning. Um, and really, it's a good way to take care of this poor land for us.
I thought it'd be an easy, economical way to get a bunch of animals through a winter, and it really wasn't for us in the end. Um, I would have been way farther ahead to be unrolling those bales. I already had the tractor started and making sure that their energy needs were being met would have paid a lot. But I was looking for an easier way to do stuff, and if you don't have to rely on a tractor to start January minus 40, it's kind of nice.
For sure. And I guess for our audience, if you haven't picked up on this already, bale grazing can be a divisive topic, which is why we chose the mentors we chose for this. And I hear this in my work all the time. Farmers who've tried it tend to either love bale grazing or hate bale grazing. I don't know that I've met anyone who's done it and has ambivalent feelings about it. Um, so yeah, we're trying to bring both perspectives to you this evening.
I don't know what
Um,
ambivalent means.
Sorry, Chris.
I don't know what ambivalent means.
We'll go with they don't have very strong feelings either way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So Chris, if you didn't have to deal with frozen bales, would you bale graze mature bred ewes rather than unroll?
Um, I don't know. It depends. I guess it's probably I think the answer we always give. Depends on the feed quality, depends on the what kind of body condition those animals were coming into winter at. Like we've grazed up until February 13th on swaths that if I had a whole bunch of bales that I could just dump out and not have to worry about it the rest of the winter, that'd be pretty cool. Um, Making sure those animals are well trained defenses would be a big part of it. It it'd be one of those crystal ball winter things though, right? Like how much snow are you gonna get? How many freeze thaw cycles are you gonna go through? Because I'd rather have wrapped bales that I'm unrolling than trying to paw my way out to a bale grazing pod and shaking bales loose to get animals fed. That doesn't sound like much fun. And I like easy and simple. Simple is really good, but easy is really important too.
All right. Um, so Dean, how do you determine when the bales are eaten enough and you move the fence to give another break and access to fresh bales? So, like, how are you balancing, if we're thinking about this from a classic nutrition sense, with making sure that your cattle have enough to eat?
Usually you screwed up a time or two, and then you're like, "Oh, this isn't working." So then you do it one day sooner than you really think. And I know that's not very technical of an answer, but that's usually how it works. If you can set it up where you can see it from driving by on the highway, that's pretty cool. Then you can figure that out easy. But otherwise, you kind of need to go out there every day. Um, we are we are usually and typically piping water out to them, so you kind of got to keep an eye on that daily and kind of judging from there.
Thanks. And a follow-up question is how soon do you go back and bale graze the same area of that pasture you're trying to rejuvenate? Or are you kind of doing like one pass where every year you're bale grazing a different section of that field to try to improve it?
Like year over year, you mean? We'll definitely be back there in the spring. We might have a little too much mat to get full grass growth out of that paddock, so we're grazing that, but we're still hitting it in the spring, um, and moving on the next year to another area with the bale grazing.
All right. Um, Chris, so with your bale bombing, I know one of the challenges with bale grazing and sheep is if you're not unrolling bales, having enough bunk space, right, that they can all get around the bale to eat. Um, how how close are you putting those bales out when you're bale bombing? And um, kind of how many sheep per bale are you estimating for that?
Um, so the most recent time I was putting those bales kind of strategically to hit spots because we're still bale grazing in the spring, and I'm trying to avoid mud and trying to keep those animals high and dry. So I'm putting them on like little knolls and stuff like that, and I'm putting out as many as I can get before the ground gets too soft in the morning. Um, that's not a great answer, I guess, but I'm trying to get just as much as I can because it's a lot easier for me to use the tractor to haul bales out with the wagon and bale bomb like that than it is to like, it's a lot of work to use the quad bale and roller. Like it's hard on my body pushing the pins in, it's hard on my body winching those bales up. And sometimes the ground looks like it's firm and then it's not. And then that really sucks when you're on a quad that's pulling a round bale around. It kind of, or the snow doesn't look that deep sometimes, and then it is that deep. And our bale and rollers tires don't follow the quads, so it can turn into a big work project suddenly. So I like getting as many bales out as I can, and again, it's like I don't want to put them on the hay field. I'm putting them at the edge of the field. I'm putting them on pastures, and I'm putting them in woodlots that I want to turn into silvopasture and silvopasture areas. Because if I leave them in the field, the guy that runs the disc bine is going to throttle me.
That is a good point. I certainly wouldn't do this kind of an operation on a rented cash crop area or a place that I hay. Um,
I would
I'm
definitely.
sure guys get away with it other places, but that just doesn't fit with what I'm trying to do.
I would never want to do it on rented property either, because it's just too valuable to the ground that it better be ground you own, I think, or long-term lease,
Right.
right? Like you don't. It's. I think it's incredibly powerful for the ground, but it has to be done just so.
So, Dean, following up with how, every year you're bale grazing in a different area on that pasture you're rejuvenating. Are you ever bale grazing the same area more than once? Or like is that in your long-term plan? How do you see
Well,
that?
we haven't. We got so much area we're trying to improve that we just haven't.
So, we've got a question here. Do you have to bale graze in different sections? Will having your bales in too small of an area build up too much residue in one spot and kill the grass?
It wouldn't. You're adding more fertility and you're adding more seed. So I would caution not using poor quality hay. I'd want to use some good quality, less weeds, lots of seed head. That would be my opinion. Um, too much of it. Too much of anything is bad, but um, you can only do what you can do too, right?
We do bale and rolling on a lot of. We only have a 100-acre farm, and we run quite a few sheep, and they'll come home for the winter. And year after year, that ground is better at taking it, if that makes any sense. Like it's almost looking for that bale and rolling, and what would have been too much when we started doing the bale and rolling on the fields, now it like it just reaches up and grabs it and takes it down. It's hungry for that nutrients and it can handle it. So that starting slow and small probably has a lot of merit in this sort of thing.
It's amazing how quickly organic matter can break down when you have a lot of biological activity in a soil. The other thing I'm gonna jump in and share a couple of pictures because I think it's interesting to see the difference in bale density. Are you seeing some black cattle in front of some bales?
Nope.
No? Okay.
No,
Hold
yeah.
on.
I'm, I gotcha.
There we go.
Okay. So this this is from the Manitoba Beef and Forage Institute, so it's out in Brandon, Manitoba. But as you can see, they've got their bales set out much tighter than what either Chris or Dean have showed us this evening. And they really are trying to get hay and cow pies on just about every square foot of the pasture that they're bale grazing. Because what they're trying to do is, yeah, boost that biological activity, really boost the fertility in that soil. And yeah, they do that by having this much higher density. Now I realize it's a drier climate, so we do have to take that into consideration. Um,
I think our bales were just about as tight with the sheep and lambs. It just
okay.
were very good. The first year we tried it for the whole winter, but the lambs they just weren't big enough and strong enough to get those bales moving around. Like a cow can just give it a shove, flip it over. Like Dean was mentioning, like they're being a bit rough, and the lambs just not. They just didn't have the power behind them,
Sure, yeah.
or sheep.
And yeah, I just while I've got the screen share going, the way they were laying out their wire, because obviously once the ground's froze, it's a pain trying to step posts in. So they were actually using the next set of bales and sticking their pigtail posts into the bales to hold the hot and ground wire out. So that's another way to
There's
actually.
actually posts out there that have a live pigtail, and a lot of those bale grazer guys like those because that the pigtail itself is electrified.
Mhm.
Cool. The other thing I found with like frozen ground, I'm farther ahead with a dead blow hammer than I am a drill. Trying to drill posts into the ground, very overrated. But like a dead blow hammer and a good post, they go in pretty quick and easy.
So the next question. Oh, sorry, Chris.
Like having your lines already set up before the ground gets froze is, I think, pretty integral in our climate.
Mhm. So the next question we had is how does the bale grazing area look the following summer for summer pasture?
For us, the first year we tried it for the whole winter, it was an awful, horrible, rotten mess. And all the guys I talked to out west are like, whatever you do, don't use harrows. Um, but it was a mess, and it took quite a while to fix that. They just the feed quality was lost because of our freeze thaw cycles, and the lambs just weren't able to eat what they needed to, and we ended up with a big ragweed mess actually, which was not as much fun. Um, but when we're doing it now in the spring, um, again, like it's not somewhere where we're haying, so having that extra residue is not a big deal, and it's definitely slower to get like rolling in the spring, but no, it shows up pretty good. Like I would say it's definitely a positive.
I thought I had pictures of it, but I don't. I couldn't find them. But like you'll have hay residue the next spring. You can see that. You might have some grass that's a bit behind in those areas, but you get the cattle back through it, they start kicking it. You've got a pile of nice decomposed manure, more or less. And by the second the year after, you cannot see those residue piles. But I'd echo that. I wouldn't harrow it. We do a bit of bale grazing up in our bull yard. You can't pull a disc through it. Like you're just asking for a mess. But if you just ignore those areas, they come back better than ever, even by the following fall.
Okay. This one's specifically for Dean. When do you call it quits for the fall or winter on the bale grazing? So what is driving the decision to bring them back to the barn?
So I'm really only making a pod for 1.5 to 2 months. That's really all I'm shooting for. We get so much snow here, my cows belly out. We're a clay loam. We're making a mess once it starts getting really wet. Um, if we get some good rain events, we'll put a pause on the bale grazing and bring the cows back to the yard. They come back pretty willing. Um, and we'll get back out there if it freezes up nice. If I had to leave them till spring, I'm not that worried anyways. We can go back there in the spring and rough that up, get a bit of grazing on it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of we're pumping water too, so we're kind of limited by the season there. If you're trying to make cows walk back and forth to the barn on that single path down the middle of the farm, that's getting wrecked pretty quick. Um, I don't know what else I had here in my notes about that. Yeah.
So our next question is, what is the advantage of giving gradual access to the bales versus just opening up the gate and letting them have at it on the whole field? So like why are our bale grazers giving breaks, whether it's a day's worth of hay or 3 days worth of hay, whatever it is? Why do that rather than just open the gate and let them pick what they want?
Oh, they'll make a mess. That's the basis for me, anyways. They're just gonna make a mess.
I think of it like overgrazing, and when we're doing rotational grazing, is that if you gave them everything all at once, they're going to eat their favorite spots and fill up on the cotton candy and not eat their steak and potatoes. So that, and then sometimes they need to eat the liver and onions too, right? And that would be kind of getting through the whole bale.
All right. Um, have either of you tried burning the spots where you've bale grazed? Our attendee has done this in New Zealand, but it's a completely different environment, and they're curious if it could work here.
So if you see in my picture, there's Highway 26 right there. Burning's a no for me. That's just, I don't know. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to babysit it, and I don't really want everybody and their grandmother calling or putting it on Facebook.
uh, um, I've used up my warnings with the City of Ottawa Fire Department. Uh, the stuff that's left to burn it, I don't know what the advantage is, and I don't think it would burn. It's usually like a soggy, messy mat, and it's sometimes you just gotta trust the process. And that's probably one of the hardest parts is like just trusting that you've done the other stuff.
And I'm going to weigh in with a government answer and a science answer as to why this is probably a bad idea. The government answer is I don't think there's many, if any, municipalities where a controlled burn would be allowed. You would have to talk to your municipality and the fire department to see if they would even issue a permit for that, which is very different from New Zealand by the sounds of things. The sciencey reason is if you're burning that plant material, you're not putting that organic matter in the soil. It's going up in smoke, quite literally. So that might actually be working against what you're trying to achieve if it's a soil health motive with your bale grazing. If you're going to burn that stuff, then don't bother bale graze. Put a feeder out there because you're losing that material. Um, okay, we're back on harrows. There was an earlier harrow question that I thought we answered, and then we've got another one. So harrowing, do you harrow these fields at all? Spring, fall, are we touching that residue with a harrow ever?
I've got a harrow, it's broken. Haven't welded it.
I have a set of diamond and chain. Um, I found the chain the other day with the four-wheeler, which that kind of sucked. I forgot I left it there. Um, no, like that's what is like the three things. It's like rotary cutter, harrow, and frost seeding means you've made a mistake somewhere and you're trying to fix it and you're probably going to make it worse. Um,
I'd say trust the science and or trust the environment and trust the process.
it
It's
it
going to be okay.
I'll use the front end loader to push cores that didn't get eaten in big chunks like that off the field, but I wouldn't harrow because you're just gonna end up with the beaver dams, and I don't know what's to be gained other than like you feel like you're doing something instead of just trusting the process.
So I guess along with trusting the process, I kind of want to circle back to something you said earlier, Chris,
Oh God.
about how your bale grazing attempt, you ended up with a lot of weeds coming up after the fact. Um, how did you deal with that? Because I know that that is the main reason when I talk to farmers that have tried this, if they don't like bale grazing, they had a similar experience. So how did you resolve that situation with the
Um,
ragweed?
with the ragweed, I had a prescription antihistamine. Oh, that's not what you mean. Um,
Not for you, for the field.
right. We cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, and you just it was one of those like we have to do it this way because this is how I learn, and it sucks. Um, but yeah, we just kept cutting until the ragweed wasn't there anymore, and then I thought, yeah, we just tore it up last year because I didn't think it was productive enough, but it actually was when you go back and look at the math. We should have left it in hay, but screwed that up again too.
I'm not opposed to brush hogging. Like most people have one. I wouldn't buy it specifically for that job. I'm usually out there mulching the brushy trees anyways. So if I gotta hit a little area, it's fine. But I don't want to kill all the grass and the grass seed that I've applied with bale grazing.
I'd rather do that like tramping and with the and use the livestock to do it as best I could.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just from this is not my first conversation on bale grazing, and one thing I kind of have started to wonder over the years is I think bale grazing really shows us what's in that soil seed bank because nobody puts a weedy bale out on their field on purpose. Right? So I know Dean's intentionally using mature hay, so he's got grass seeds and species that he wants out there, but no one drops a weedy bale on purpose. So if we're getting weeds coming up, I I think it might be a symptom of just what happened to be in the soil. It's not it's not bad management. It's not that you did something wrong. It's just we can't tell what's there until we give it a chance to grow. And sometimes it's not what we hoped it was.
And sometimes that's like a under a stress situation too. Like we're putting our forage species under stress too much. So I probably grazed too late into the season or damaged it by putting it out the wrong day, right? Not resting the species that we had there that I wanted well enough.
Mhm. So another common question that comes up with bale grazing is soil compaction. So what have you guys seen in terms of soil compaction on your farms because you're out wintering and you're feeding bales?
For me,
I'd say, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
the unrolling bales, if I'm doing it and the weather's not right, making ruts is compaction. You're smearing that soil, making a mess, and I really want to avoid that. But for the rest of the point, like um, sheep don't really do enough to make a difference, right? They're so small and light, and we are moving them regularly enough that it's not an issue. So I have to be careful when I'm operating equipment and what equipment I'm operating. Like a four wheeler with the bale and roller, pretty light, moves quick, doesn't make a mess, but the tractor does.
Yeah, I'd say for me, the tractor is going to make the most compaction, getting that pod set up. So I'm trying to do that when it's not pouring rain and when it's not. Like we've got a good sod under us, the places we're doing this. So, um, hoof action, we want to move them soon enough that we're not making a mess or moving them off of that if we're making a huge mud hole. Um, yeah, we're moving fence on foot a lot of the times with the four instead of with the four wheeler.
The one thing I kind of think of, damn it, I lost my thought. But the so bale grazing, sorry, in the spring for us is a really good fit, not just because avoiding the mud, avoiding the rots and stuff like that. Our ewes lamb in May, so we're getting into a little bit later gestation, and I find they get kind of stupid, and we'll get too close to tires trying to get the best feed, and they don't move like they should. So doing bale grazing that, I'm setting it up when they're not around. Um, it saves a bunch of sheep's lives doing that kind of stuff too, which is made good value.
For sure. Uh, this question's for Dean. So, because you do some bale grazing and some yard feeding with your cattle, how would you compare the waste between those two systems? Are you using more bales per day when you're bale grazing versus feeding in the yard? And if so, how much is that difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really don't view the wastage in bale grazing as wastage. Um, yes, there's more on the ground. I use good Hawken um, donut bale feeders. We get very, very minimal waste. The hay doesn't fall out of them. All the hay that goes in that feeder goes in a cow, besides maybe a little bit when we move the feeder. But I have to haul all the manure and bed the yard. So it's a good question. I don't view that waste out there in the field doing bale grazing as waste. That's money I don't have to spend to spread manure. But I would save the better quality stuff to put in bale feeders to feed in the yard. That's for sure.
All right. I'll put out another call for questions in the chat, but if no one has one while we're talking, then this might be your last question. So what changes have you seen on your farm because of how you're outwintering livestock and feeding bales out without feeders? Good or bad?
Definitely improve grass growth, more organic matter where we're trying to focus it, less manure to haul, and it's a good place to creep feed calves too. Like uh, like I said, once we bring them in the yard, we find that we have to separate calves, and then we're into that weaning process. If we're doing it out there on bale grazing, we can have our creep feeders set up, filled once, and they take care of themselves.
Definitely improved yields off our hay fields. Improved um, late season grazing, early season grazing, because like we don't have any animals here at home during the typical grazing season. All of our animals go to a solar site, so bale bombing in the woods that doesn't get hayed means when those animals finally do come home after grazing cover crops and other farms, um, there's something there for them to eat. So it's, I would say, better animal performance, lower feed costs year over year, even though with inflation and stuff. Um, Animal health, I think, is just so much better. Getting them out, getting them walking, that fresh air spread out. I think it makes a big, big difference.
All right. And there's a bit of a follow-up in terms of, how much more hay do we need for bale grazing than in a feeder? Um, just because, trying to budget how much hay you would need. And I think that's actually a great point to mention because if you've not tried bale grazing before and you're thinking of starting it, I would caution that years where feed inventory is tight, it's not a good year to try it for the first time because you will go through a lot more hay than you normally would, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're trying to buy extra feed in February, March, or April because that's the time of year when it's going to be the most expensive. So, yeah, years when you have a normal or a higher inventory would probably be the better years to try this if it's your first time trying it, because it'll give you a sense of how much more hay you might need. All right. Any closing thoughts, Dean or Chris, before I hand things back over to Patricia?
Anything can fit in a system. If you try things where people aren't watching, you just try things and you make mistakes and then you learn from those mistakes. Or you try to join a webinar and figure out what other people are doing, right? Not everybody, not all your neighbors will really tell you what they're actually doing or if it's actually succeeding. I don't really care what my neighbors think, but if they ask me, I'll tell them about the same things as I've told you guys. But not everybody will do that, right? Um,
I think bale
or-
grazing is a excellent fit. Uh, Maybe not on all farms all the time, but I think it definitely has its places. Provides a lot of good value. Um, Try and keep your costs low. Try different things. Watching your animals and doing that body condition score, I think that's a big key to success. Getting a like maybe you're not starting the tractor, but maybe you're starting a snowmobile or a four wheeler, and you're going out and watching them and making sure like they're really working hard to get a mouthful, and maybe they're slipping a body condition score or half. Getting out there with a bit of grain or something else could have a lot of value.
yeah, I'm not afraid to pull a cow that's going skinny on me in the fall, pull her back to the yard. It's animal husbandry. It's not just put the cows out there and walk away, as much as I do that sort of. But you gotta you're not a dairyman, but a dairyman looks at his cows every day and figures out what they need and can
Sounds
measure production, right? We can't do that grazing beef cows or sheep or whatever, but we need to spend that time and still manage the herd and do those kinds of things.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you to our audience for submitting such great questions. So with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Patricia to close us out.
So thank you, Christine, Dean, and Chris. I think we all learned a lot tonight. So good night, and thank you all for joining us.